Sure. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. Um, is the video coming up here, or the PowerPoint coming up all right?
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent. Okay, so thanks for that wonderful introduction, Kelly. As she mentioned, we're really going to be focusing on how we look at the video data that comes through the NODA application, but you'll get a good sense. Some of you may be using NODA, some of you may be new to NODA and thinking about whether you want to use it. What we're going to be doing is really highlighting how, as a clinician, you can view the videos that the families upload from home, and how do you go about characterizing the behaviors that you're seeing on the video. So that's going to be our major focus. And I'm looking forward to certainly during we'll do a little bit of a demo of how we do the tagging, and we'll also have some insights on some of the different strategies that I use, Dr. Morrier and Dr. Schwartz all use when we're doing the tagging. Just to, as Kelly mentioned, we are all from the Emory Autism Center in Florida. And this is our center on a beautiful day. But part of what we do at the Emory Autism Center is diagnostic evaluations. And for the last few years, we have been partnering with NODA for research, and also using NODA. We're going to begin to use it more and more as a clinical tool. We found that it's a really powerful assessment tool in terms of being able to capture videos at home that are really very nicely formatted and put together in a way that families have been able to take those videos, follow those instructions, use similar scenarios, and then having the platform to be able to characterize what we're seeing in those videos and have it automatically be distilled according to where the behaviors we saw fit either the DSM criteria for autism or maybe indicative of more typical behaviors. So just emphasizing, as Kelly also mentioned, Ron Oberleitner will be here. If you have more questions about NODA itself in terms of the platform and how it's used, etc., Ron will be able to answer those later in the webinar. We're going to really focus more on the clinician side of it. Just in terms of the workflow, so if somebody makes a referral, the initial kind of model is for a pediatrician to be focused on, after screening or concerns about autism, referring the family, if they are referred either directly to NODA or to a center like ours or to a clinician, we may interface with the family in using NODA. And when we have those videos, then the things that we are particularly observing in the video analysis are those autism behaviors as well as typical behaviors. And there's an opportunity for you to kind of give a qualitative summary of what you have seen in the scenarios from the home. Oops. All right, and so to consider yourself a NODA clinician or somebody that is using NODA, the behavior imaging really recommends that you are experienced in diagnosing autism clinically, and that you have at least 5 years of experience and are operating according to your scope of practice and licensure in your state. And also another component is completing the training, which, if you haven't done that yet, I encourage you to go to the behavior imaging website, and there is a very clear step that goes through some of the practical things about introducing NODA to the families and the components of NODA, and also gives some practice cases for you to complete and then compare to a gold standard in a Sandbox. And we're going to show you some of those, or actually one of those Sandbox cases. So the NODA training, this is when you go to the website, some of the things you will see is basically kind of the background and what niche NODA is hoping to fill or and has been filling, some of the elements of a high quality diagnosis. What is NODA? How does it work? What is some of the research? How does the app work in the portal? Instructional videos for the caregiver, etc. But then in terms of how to assess with NODA, the training doesn't go into a great detail in terms of the actual tagging of behaviors. So that's really what we're trying to focus on today. So this is a picture of kind of the NODA video, the dashboard that you will see as a clinician. And as you're watching these, typically around 10-minute video snippets, you'll see that little pin down on the bottom on the scroll bar there at the bottom of the video. That pin indicates that there was a behavior that was happening in the video that was significant for some reason. It could either have been an autism specific behavior, or it could have been something that we would consider more of a typical behavior or not terribly unusual, something you would expect a child of that age to do at that stage of development. And you really gives you the opportunity to kind of then go through the video and look at the landscape of the types of behaviors that the child is engaging in during that video. So you can then in the end look at the summary, really evaluating whether that child is meeting any of the specific DSM criteria. So it's really important, and this is why NODA is a tool for people that are experienced in diagnosing autism, is because we are going back. Our standard is not that this is just a NODA specific diagnosis. We're trying to look, this is an opportunity to observe behaviors in the home that may or may not be associated with autism. So this is a paraphrase of the DSM criteria because it's just a lot simpler than the big long criteria. But when we're looking at what is a diagnosis of autism, all three of the social communication and interaction behaviors should be present, either currently or by history, and significant enough to have occurred early in life and causing clinically significant impairment. So in sort of our paraphrase of these criteria, the first social communication and interaction criteria is really about the back and forth of interacting with people. It's about social emotional reciprocity. How do we have that give and take, including responding to when other people are trying to communicate with us, initiating communications and interactions, and not just to get stuff, but to connect with other people. And so we're going to be wanting to see evidence of that in the videos. Is this child responding when the parent is talking to them, when something interesting happens? Are they initiating, and under what circumstances? And because the videos are not scripted in that the families are not given very specific instructions about do this activity, do that activity. It's more scenarios. We're trying to see what's happening in a more natural kind of way. And the next criteria being nonverbal social communication. So observing the videos gives us lots of opportunities to see not just what is the child saying or what kind of sounds or words are coming out of their mouth, but how are they using their body? Are they orienting to the other people? Are they using their eye contact? Are they changing their facial expressions? Are they using gestures or pointing or things of that nature? So we're going to want to note that, both lack of those behaviors as well as the presence of those behaviors. And then finally in the social, we're really focusing on relationships. And what are some of the behaviors that indicate an interest in other people or an awareness of other people, or this is something we probably won't observe as much, kind of insight. And I'll go over in just a few minutes some of the specific behaviors that are already pre-populated in the video dashboard for us to be tagging as we observe the videos, and then those behaviors map back to the specific DSM criteria that they help inform. And then also the videos give us the opportunity to observe restricted and repetitive behaviors and interests. So any of these things that we might observe, we're going to want to note. Also, we may be noting typical play. We may be noting, good engagement and other things as well. But if we're seeing repetitive body movements or use of objects or language, or being very specific and rigid, or having some kind of routine or an unusual interest, or fixation or sensory behaviors, those are all things that we are going to want to tag and note for our final summary. So what we've done is worked with behavior imaging to kind of give a little bit more of a conceptual theme behind the way the tags are put together, so that they map a little bit more clearly to the DSM criteria and are really helping us kind of characterize the DSM criteria, but in a specific behavioral way. So for instance, with deficits in social emotional reciprocity, the first criteria for autism, which is here, I paraphrased it as the back and forth of interacting with people. We're really looking for behaviors that are about initiating interactions, responding to interactions. If you look at examples in the DSM, it talks about verbal reciprocity as well. So conversations, bringing and giving and pointing to show interest, reciprocal interactions like ball play, etc. These are the types of things that are giving us some clue as to how this child is able to be more reciprocal with other people. And so what we've done is we've kind of taken the concepts and the themes of each of the criteria, similar with each of the restricted and repetitive behaviors, as well as associated features. So some of the things you may, certainly when you're doing your final diagnostic assessment, really wanting to characterize things that may cause clinical challenges or everyday impairments or challenges for the child or the family, but aren't core to the diagnosis of autism. So if you're seeing a child that is very active, you're going to want to be able to tag that you're seeing that high activity level, for instance, or aggressive type behavior, for instance. So those will be part of the behaviors we're tagging as well. Some things in terms of the clinical specifiers for an autism diagnosis are not things that you will necessarily be able to assess directly with NODA. You're going to need other information to look at intellectual levels and impairment, but you can get some good information about how they're approaching the toys or objects or activities in the environment around them. You can get a pretty good sense of their language, because there's opportunities during a video of mealtime and play with other people to hear, is this child using any verbal language? Are they using words or phrases or sentences or complex sentences? Where are they on that expressive language continuum? We won't necessarily get information about other medical or genetic conditions, but there is a background developmental history form that families fill out that gives you some information about milestones and concerns, and potentially other identified conditions. So NODA won't provide every single piece of information you need for the diagnosis, but can help you with that actual observation of the child's behaviors. And one thing that our team found is that I have to admit that when we first used NODA, I was pretty skeptical, because I felt like we did a study that looked at the difference between timing to diagnosis of an in-person assessment and using primarily NODA, of using the video-based assessment. And we also got feedback from families about their experience with NODA versus in-person. And both us as the clinicians and the families found that having the video observations really gave us a different perspective in terms of much more comfortable for the family to be at home, more natural, seeing the child not in a clinical setting really provides some valuable information. So particularly in this time of COVID, we find being able to have a structured way of observing the child at home is really helpful. So before we jump into the specific tags and look at an example case, I just wanted to point out that there is a user manual that's available on the website. There's a section that says for clinicians, and when you go through the training, you can download the manual. And in the manual, there are specific definitions of each of the tag behaviors. So what does it mean to ignore others, or not sharing, or limited social response? It's helpful to have this printed out, particularly if you're a new user to NODA. As you get to know what the tags are, it's helpful to kind of have them listed. I have, for instance, just a sheet where I have all the tags listed, so it's easier for me to quickly remember, because we'll see in just a minute how the view of the tags next to the video are a little bit small. So I do encourage you to make sure you get the user manual and print this out, and spend some time perusing that. So those tag behaviors, so if you see on the screen here the tag glossary and the specific tagging behaviors here, this is just a list, and a list as in mapping it back to which of the behaviors that we may observe in the video are emblematic or characteristic of a specific DSM criteria for autism. So A1, I'm going to use the shorthand here, is the impairments in social emotional reciprocity. And so the glossary of behaviors that we're going to be tagging in the videos are things that relate to lack of social response, social initiation, and also challenges with reciprocity in terms of verbal. So for instance, if you are watching the video of the child and they're trying to open up a container or get a toy out, and they're not looking around to their parent or their sibling or whoever's around, that lack of attempting to get attention or help is important to note. And so that would be a behavior that you would tag in the video at that point. So I think one thing that I would just encourage you to always keep in mind is that sometimes we're tagging lack of an expected behavior. It might not be something as obvious as hand flapping, or the parent calls their name and the child doesn't respond. So that would be, for instance, under social response, not responding to name. If that happens naturally during the video, that the child's name is called and the child doesn't respond, you would want to tag it at that moment in the video. But we also need to pay attention to things that may not be as active behaviors. They may be absent behaviors. So like the example I just mentioned about not getting help when you would expect the child to be asking for help. So throughout the entire video, you're going to want to have a good idea of what the tags are, and be noting whether either the presence or the absence of those behaviors are there. So we see, like in terms of initiation, the not giving or showing objects, or not initiating or seeking comfort or affection or sharing food, toys, or objects. That's going to require you to have a little bit of judgment in terms of, would you expect that a child at this moment would be sharing food or toys or objects? And if so, and the child doesn't do that, then noting that at that time. Or if there is an initiation towards the child and they're not responding, they're either ignoring or not or having a limited response, or not following where someone is pointing or looking or responding to their name. Those are a bit more clear, discrete. Behavior was initiated. Was there a response? And if not, you would want to tag that behavior. In terms of the verbal, limited commenting. Again, this is more of the absence of expected, whether it's chattering or jabbering or actual conversation, depending on the child's language, or not responding verbally when you would expect. Typically, there's a response. Talking to themselves or having one-sided conversation or tangential or disconnected language. Those are all going to be some of the key things to be noting in terms of social emotional reciprocity. When we look at the next criteria, nonverbal communication, and on the left of the screen is how we frame sort of the spectrum of nonverbal communication challenges associated with autism at the Emory Autism Center. So in terms of nonverbal communication, somebody that has a higher degree of challenge or impairment or impact might have very limited nonverbal communication and be much more physical in the way that they're communicating with others, versus somebody that's more kind of on the moderate or needing some support, but not as much as the limited and physical, is that they may use eye contact when they're highly motivated, or they might point to get something, but it's inconsistent. Or at kind of the most mild or the least level of support, but still may be impaired, is that the nonverbal communication is present, but maybe it's stilted or somewhat reduced or less likely to be a full range of expressions, etc. So that's just kind of we're often thinking developmentally, and what the tags are meant to do within the fact that NODA is really meant to be used for early diagnoses. So in the first, certainly the first several, or the preschool period or before if possible, but up through early school age. So we're not looking at the full spectrum of tagging behaviors that if we had an adult that was highly verbal, but the range of behaviors are really meant to capture across the types of things and the way that within younger individuals who are being evaluated for autism might show challenges with nonverbal social communication. So here we're really looking at things from not directing vocalization, directing facial expressions, having limited expression or gestures, or limited eye contact, or unusual facial expression or intonation. Also, some of the basic use of gestures like pointing at objects of interest or not pointing to request, using other people as tools, having volume way too high or low. Those kind of things are things that you're going to be tagging for nonverbal. And then just similarly, in terms of the relationships, what is the evidence that we see in the video of being aware of social situations? So if you see a child that seems to be oblivious of the fact that their sibling just walked right through and took their toy, you would want to tag that behavior. Or the lack of interest. They just don't seem to care or really have very limited interaction with either their peers or caregiver. Peer could be a sibling in this situation. We're taking kind of the insight here of some more concrete behavioral examples of being very directed and rigid, and limited understanding of social cues or conventions, or just unusual social behavior. And I think, we are very good, I think, at seeing, hearing, observing some of the restricted and repetitive behaviors But again, characterizing them in terms of, well, what is repetitive about it? Is it the behavior? Is it the speech aspect of it? Are we talking about using objects? Are we talking about the repetitive ways of using the body, for instance, or objects? Or are we talking about somebody being repetitive on their sort of the way that they're talking, their scriptedness or their ideas? Similarly with the next restricted and repetitive behavior criteria. So for a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, you need to have all of the social criteria, as well as at least 2 of the restricted and repetitive behaviors. So the NODA tagging will give you the opportunity to capture and to summarize any of these types of behaviors that you observe in the home video. So whether it's the rigidity of the child having a hard time transitioning in the behavior, or having a really unusual or a compulsive behavior in the video, or very specific interests where they're really homing in on a particular part of a toy or a little fuzz on the carpet, or they're preoccupied with something, they keep talking about the same object, or they're carrying something around. Those are all things that you're going to want to tag as you see it in the video. And a nice thing about having those tags is then you'll have a map of this child's behavior during this whole segment, and you can go back and you can observe, looking at different tags at different times to kind of see, when did this occur, what is this looking like, how common is it, etc. And then the last criteria and the tags are related to the sensory interests. So really characterizing what type of unusual sensory interests are we seeing. And it's phrased as unusual because it could be an attraction or it could be an aversion. You know, typically when we're thinking about kind of degrees of impairment or support needed, having both attractions and aversions to sensory being more kind of intense than either attraction or aversion or a sensitivity. NODA doesn't really have us tag in terms of sort of the level of impairment or functioning, but does have us tag in terms of the types of sensory issues that we're seeing. And what is the domain? Is it auditory? Is it olfactory? Is it vestibular? So then you can go back and again look at the landscape for that child. Also, you're going to want to get to know some of the associated features. So if you're seeing things like aggression or activity or articulation issues or language delay, this is a way to characterize that within your tagging, as well as abnormalities in mood or not playing with toys or self-injury, those kind of things. I've yet to observe a sleep associated feature on a NODA video, but certainly temper tantrums can come up. And then the last area of tagging is about things that what we're calling typical, but seem relatively expected for a child of that age. And this would be things such as, you know, the parent asks them to follow a direction and they do it. They're playing appropriately with toys. They're actually directing other people's attention or making eye contact or looking at people and making eye contact and using gestures. They're pointing or directing their facial expression. They're sharing and initiating or playing with others. They're responding, either nonverbal. So sometimes, you know, say mom says, "Hey, look at this," and the child just laughs at them. Well, that's a nice response. And so we want to capture that there was an initiation towards the child and they actually responded. Same with verbal response. So this will give us an idea at the end when we kind of put all this together and we're looking at, well, what are some of these autism behaviors that we saw? And what are some of these associated features and some of the typical behaviors? And what does the whole profile look like based on just this observation? So what I want to do now is jump into one of the videos that's in the Sandbox and kind of just show you how the tagging works. So I'm going to switch here. All right. So this is just, I mentioned the manual. Can you guys see that manual?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. All right, so this is how it's available online, but you can also download it so you have either a copy on your computer or a paper copy. But
And I
it's a
did share the link to the manual in the chat. So if anyone wants to go grab it, it's right there.
Fabulous, thank you. All right, and then, oops. Oh, darn, I took too much time. I think I should be able to log back in. So when you register for doing the Sandbox, you'll get a login and a password, and then you will see that there are two different cases here. So you click on, and this is one child's videos and a second child's videos. And you click on that, and you can then hide this menu here. And for some of you, you may already be using NODA regularly, so this might be old hat to you. For others, it might be new. But looking at this dashboard here for this child, we have the developmental history. And there's some of us, and in a little bit, Dr. Morrier and Schwartz will talk about as well some of their strategies. I always tend to look at the developmental history first. So I have some kind of context for the child. Typically there's the age is populated here, and this is information that the parent completed. So describing the current concerns they have for their child's development. They're very concerned about speech and language, and interacting with other kids. Another question is, does your child seek attention or interaction with you in a positive, enjoyable way? So they're saying, yes, this is a thing that he does. It's positive. Closest with his grandmother. How old was the child when he used single words? Used phrases. So you'll get somewhat of a sense of language progression. An example of something you've heard the child say this morning. So they want it, very specific. So putting it in a recent time, hopefully people can give you an example. So here we're saying, okay, Grandma, I want my ABCs. Daddy, I want water. So this is a simple phrases is where I'm coming in to say this child expressive speech is. No known medical conditions according to the parent report. Hearing has been checked. The child's physical development, understanding function of common objects like a fork, spoon, or phone, pretending. If you hide an object, will they find it? So looking at some of these key kind of milestones, looking for favorite objects, pointing, gestures, interest in other children, interest in toys or activities, and medication. So you kind of get, and you may have other developmental histories already completed, but that kind of gives you an idea of what the NODA request is. So you can look at that, and then you can look at any of the 4 videos. Sometimes in parent concerns, there's multiple videos, but families are asked to take a 10-minute video, continuous video of the child playing alone, playing with others. So ideally another child. Often it's siblings at a mealtime, and something that the parent is concerned about. So then what you're going to want to do is you go into each of these videos And as you are watching, I'll pause here. You can pause, you can forward and go back and move around in the video. But here are the list of tags. So that list I showed you that's in the glossary, the list I showed you that is in the PowerPoint that goes through each of the DSM criteria. So if you recall that here we had for A1, social emotional reciprocity, some of the things that we're looking for are social initiation, social response, and verbal reciprocity behaviors. So not responding when expected, and that continues on. The nonverbal list, the social list, the behavior list. And so getting to know this list is really important because you're going to be watching the video and then coming back here to find the behaviors that really capture what's going on. So one thing you'll find is needing strategies to help orient the family in taking the video. So for instance, of saying, make sure the TV is off in the background. That happens way too often. So I'm going to switch to this one just because it's easier to hear. So there the child is talking, but it's not necessarily directed as clearly as it could be, not really looking at the parent. So I'm going to tag limited eye contact. Also found that the intonation seemed a little bit unusual. And then go back. And if you see that there is a pin that was put at that spot. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. So there the child initiated to the parent, made a brief eye contact. So I'm going to say this is an initiation. It was someone just sharing a comment. It was a little bit unusual, but not anything that I would code at this moment.
Dumpty. You should be able to Humpty Dumpty roll, huh? Let's do numbers. Where's the Humpty Dumpty roll? Let's do numbers. Where's the Dumpty roll?
So I'm not quite sure what he said. He didn't really respond to mom exactly what she said. So I'm going to tag this as one odd intonation. And basically, here we go. Tangential disconnected language. And then I can put a note. Okay, and continuing on.
Do numbers. So, see the numbers?
So here he did respond. What number is that? And he said 1. There was the holding up. Wasn't clearly a show, but he did kind of initiate, or actually that was more of a response. I put that there. So, continue on.
Where's Floyd? Oh, I think that's not it.
Oh, I see Floyd.
Maybe it's
So where's, he was asking, initiating to get something. But again, unusual intonation. Not really looking. In addition, at this point, his language is seeming very choppy. So I'm gonna include language delay.
a box. Maybe it's in your box. What about where's your potato man?
There was a echoing.
Potato Man.
What happened to potato man? Did he get lost?
So you continue going down that path of looking at the behaviors, and as you get faster, it gets a little bit easier to quickly tag the behaviors, and doing that for each of the videos. And then finally, when you are done with each of those videos, you submit it and go through all, and then to the DSM checklist. Now this is not completed, so I can't show you that everything was tagged, but just in that short sample that I showed you, we have each of the DSM criteria here, and it gives you the opportunity, or you really actually have to note some comments about what did you see overall. This is going to be your summary of what you saw across all the videos. And then it will summarize for you which of the behaviors that you tagged are associated with that criteria. So for instance, here I had tagged the tangential or disconnected language. Now, after I've gone through all 4 videos, which is approximately 40 minutes, sometimes less with the concern videos, you make the judgment, do you feel like the behaviors you saw were sufficient to endorse that criteria based on these observations? Continuing on, you get a nice summary of the nonverbal behavior and also frequency. So here, just in that little snippet, we saw relatively lots of odd intonation and limited eye contact. Those are pretty common behaviors. And as you can imagine, as you continue on, you'll get a good sense of how common this is. Is this something that only happened once, or was it pretty regular throughout the observation? Continuing on through the behavioral criteria, endorsing yes or no for each one. For each of the domains you're using, again, so this is very dependent on your clinical judgment. There's not a specific formula that says you've got to do this tagging exactly this way and that's the only way to do it. What you're trying to do is capture clinically relevant behaviors so that you can then evaluate in the end, do you feel like based on this observation there's enough to endorse that criteria in these observations? What is the level of support that is needed what is your estimate of the other aspects of the DSM criteria? So any evidence in the developmental history, or depending on the child's age, you should be able to get some indication of the developmental period. What's your assessment of impairment? And are they better explained by other conditions like intellectual disability? And then putting your specifiers there, as well as commenting on any associated features. So NODA also will summarize any of the associated features that you have characterized in the video as well, so you have that also. And then a summary description of all of the tags. And then the end is to rate in a more qualitative way, what is your confidence of the diagnosis based on the videos? Are you really certain this child has autism? Is it likely, may or may not meet ASD, likely not ASD, or certain not ASD? And that really is to just be a check about how certain you are. In many situations, you may need additional information, and so that will just be a consistent way of characterizing that. And then your comments. And then after that, you submit, and what happens is this generates a report. But before I show you that, I just wanted to, so that's kind of typically how I go through, starting with the developmental history. As you go through the videos, you'll notice that there are certain behaviors that happen over and over again. And this is where it's more of your own clinical judgment about, do you watch the entire video and tag every single behavior you see? So if you, every time you see or hear unusual intonation, do you go through and tag that so you have a really good picture of the landscape of that child's behaviors? Or do you just tag the first couple to make sure that you capture it in the final summary, but you're not as concerned about frequency? That may depend on your use of NODA, on your own behavior, what you're interested in. Typically what I do is I'm pretty fastidious about tagging everything I see to start. And then if it's the same thing over again, I may slack off a little bit, to tell you the truth, but then I'm gonna, if I see that behavior again, you know, in a few minutes, I might tag it every once in a while just to get the sense that this is occurring throughout the whole segment. And that, so I get a good tag that says, yeah, this is continuing on, versus every single one. That's kind of a different, you know, people have different ways of doing that. So I wanted to pause a little bit before I show you the summary report and we go to questions to hear from Dr. Morrier and Dr. Schwartz about, you know, some of the differences or some of the ways that they approach doing the tagging. So Dr. Morrier, do you have other thoughts to add or strategies that are different?
I mean, I think I do it mostly the same way that Dr. Rice does it. The thing I do differently is I actually don't look at the developmental history until after I've tagged all the videos. Because I don't want what's been reported in the developmental history to influence how I might see some of the behaviors that I'm seeing in the video. So I tend to tag all 4 videos first and then look at the history. And when I'm tagging it, I tend to use the tag search button more, where if you notice when Dr. Rice had the video on and she paused it, there was, when you go to the tags, there's a place that says search tags, I think. I just put in a first couple of letters of the behavior I'm looking for, and it pulls up all those tags that are related to that. So I can then pick from there instead of going up and down the list. The other kind of difference, probably, or not difference, but just with multiple behaviors, is I'm very similar in that in the beginning, I'm going to tag sort of everything, but I have in my head, like once I've tagged it 5 times, I then stop, and then if it comes up kind of quarterly throughout the video, I kind of break the videos up into quarters. Every quarter, I then tag it again to know that it's something, again, that's happening throughout and not just this one period. And I think those are kind of the biggest differences between the way we tag, even though they're kind of similar. It's looking at it differently. I think the biggest one, as I said, is when we view the developmental history, because I just don't want to be influenced. And I do those in our in-person assessments too, trying not to look at anything that's been sent in before, so that I'm getting the kid just clear and then looking at all those other behaviors that have been reported. I don't know if Dr. Schwartz does it differently, or since she's been trained by both of us, she's kind of a combination of us.
I would say I am a good combination. I'm a little bit of an over tagger. I tag everything, probably because I know someone else might be looking at it and I want to be as thorough as possible. It also helps me maintain the attention to the videos as you're watching, because a lot of times you think you're going to watch the same thing over and over again, and then something new does pop up at the end or halfway through that you hadn't seen or you weren't expecting. So I do tag everything. I also tag the positive behaviors, the typical behaviors, maybe more than others, because I also want to be able to, when I do feedback or do the summary, to be able to notice like the strengths. Like, he is capable and he did do it. He's just not doing it as much as expected or across settings as we would hope or think he should for his age. I do use the tag search box as well. I think especially once you start getting to know the tags, it makes it very easy to search. Even as you're getting to know it, you know it's a social, you can put social and it narrows it down, or you know it's a verbal, you can narrow it down pretty easy. I also sometimes make notes in the tag details about what's going on if I think you know, that's notable, to kind of differentiate that the tag was, you know, the repetitive behavior was specific to this. But that's it. I do look at the developmental history first, just kind of how I do the in-person as well. But that's pretty much the same.
And I should say, with the tag details, I do put notes in there as well, especially for some of the behaviors related to the sensory things. So is it an aversion versus an attraction? Just because I do want to know the difference. And some of them is more notes for me for when I am giving feedback to the parent or talking treatment with the parent. I kind of know, it's reminding me why I said this and what would be the best way to handle it.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to chime in with a friendly 5-minute warning and see if we can move on to some of the questions we've gotten in the chats. Let me hop over to my questions sheet. So first question, how does NODA work for children at the upper end of the age range it has been used with, 6 to 11, and those who have better expressive language and cognitive skills, i.e. those who might be more subtle?
Yeah, that's a great question. And something that we've definitely come up against a lot more during times of COVID when we're doing more remote assessments. You know, this is just my opinion. I don't think behavior imaging has put it out this way. I think rather than age, NODA works better based on verbal language. So kids that have more limited language, either they're pre-verbal or have minimal verbal language, to single words, short phrases, short sentences, it tends to be a good picture of the child interacting, because kids at that age tend to be doing more play and just kind of wandering around and showing in more nonverbal behaviors. So I think with kids that have more expressive language or over 8, in general, it's a little bit less relevant. And
if I can just say for that, sorry, I know we're running out of time, but one of the first times we used NODA clinically, was we actually had a child who came in for an in-person assessment. The mother reported all of this language, all of these skills that we just did not see in our assessment. And so we actually did have mom, and the parents were separated, so we had mom take some videos, or ask mom to take videos and dad to take videos at home so that we could see where those differences were. And it really showed that a lot of what we saw in person was being seen at home. It was just being described differently. And so we were able to really be like, we saw this, and this is what we saw at your home as well. So it does help with that at all levels, I think.
How do you support parents to buy in to an assessment where the clinicians, sorry, that made my chat disappear, 1 second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. How do you support the parents to buy into an assessment where the clinicians may not see the child in person at all? And a related question, do parents generally accept the diagnosis even though they do not attend the assessment?
I think that is where seeing NODA as part of a clinician tool is really important. One, you've had some conversations with the family ahead of time, and ideally, particularly in this time period when people are much more used to video-based interaction, if you can have a video-based, HIPAA compliant communication with the family, do any of your interviews or other things that you need to be doing, and you're establishing rapport in that way, I think that helps a lot, because then they get to know you, you get to know them. Also, I think that letting families know that if you're trying to use NODA, and again, particularly in times of COVID, it's extra helpful. If you're trying to come up with a diagnosis, to let the family know that you're gonna evaluate your own certainty, and you're gonna be as straightforward as you can with the family about, do you feel like you have sufficient information at this time point to make that diagnosis, to hopefully move that child on to the next stage of getting access to supportive intervention. But if you have any doubts and you need more information, that you're gonna let them know. And if they have doubts, that you're going to be open to that. And that may mean scheduling the in-person or waiting until that's safe and appropriate, depending on where you are and what the COVID situation is. But I think just letting families know that the door is open, and you're going to judge your certainty. You're going to want to hear their feedback. That's what I find is helpful.
How do you ensure that attachment challenges are not responsible for the child's presentation?
Yeah, so that's always an important question, a question about attachment issues. I think that's where you have to say, okay, well, what's the quality of the behavior? What is the looking at the situations? What is the presence of some of the restricted and repetitive and unusual interests? What's the initiations and the quality like? Some of that is really just looking at that quality, and as you're observing it and getting the developmental history, putting that all together. I mean, I think that the qualitative difference between an autism behavior and attachment behavior, hopefully as you go through all of the videos, I find it very helpful. We've used NODA when we've had some real sort of concerns. Even in our in-person videos, our assessments, we've gone the opposite, that we weren't 100% sure about the diagnosis from our in-person assessment. And so we have the families take the NODA videos at home and do the assessment, and it actually has helped us be much more clear about the context and the quality of their behaviors. So I think it is a clinical judgment still.
There's also an element that you can request additional or different videos if you feel like the video doesn't display what you had hoped, or you want to see a different scenario of kind of the same setting. You can request that for additional information.
Yeah.
It is noon. I'm gonna see if our guests are willing to stay a little longer to field a few more questions. but I do want to assure everyone that the questions will be posted along with answers with the video of the webinar. So if you have to hop off and you're not able to hear the answer to your question, you will still have access to it after the fact. And I will be sending the recorded webinar out to everyone who registered. So just to assure you of that, Dr. Rice, Dr. Morrier, Dr. Schwartz, are you comfortable sticking around for another few minutes?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
How do you find NODA with preschool girls who have age-appropriate cognitive skills?
So could you repeat that again? Say,
how do you find NODA with preschool girls who have age-appropriate cognitive skills?
well, Dr. Schwartz has recently just had a couple, or one like this that might be good. I mean, I think that, so please add in just a second, but I think that it really depends on the child and the behaviors and what they're showing. I mean, when we're talking about an autism spectrum disorder, it shouldn't be something that is just transient, and it should transcend language and cognitive skills. We should be seeing some of that unusual either lack of awareness or attention or interest in interacting, as well as some of the unusual behaviors. And that, again, that's the nice thing about having different scenarios that you're looking at NODA, because you get opportunity to see the child comfortable and at home and at a mealtime, and you tend to see some of those behaviors if they're present. But that, I have to say, in our experience, those younger, or girls in particular, higher cognitive level, higher verbal, those tend to be some of the children that we end up needing much more, either making sure that we have a really good developmental and autism interview, like the autism diagnostic interview, that we have other information from other sources, or that we've also seen them in person. Dr. Schwartz, any follow-up to that?
No, I think that's about it. The only other thing, sometimes it's nice to compare, especially if we can get videos from 18 to 24 months to the videos to NODA, to kind of see how are they around that developmental period, what else is going on, you know, how are they developing, were they meeting social milestones at that time, and then how do they look now? And again, sometimes we just have to ask for more information, whether it's another video to tag or different kind of assessment.
Are you using NODA as an interim assessment during COVID, or do you feel it can be used as a replacement for ADOS2 on a regular basis?
We, in our clinic, we had been using it for research purposes and have actually been working on expanding our use of it on an ongoing basis pre-COVID. In COVID times, it's actually super helpful. But on a regular basis, one of the things that we've been very just sort of aware of and concerned about, and this may vary based on state and where you are, but that we want to make sure that NODA continues to be seen as a clinician tool, and that because, say, you start with doing a NODA assessment and you determine that you need additional information or an in-person assessment, that doesn't get denied in terms of coverage. So we've been trying to come up with a tier model where children who may be younger or have a very high risk on autism screening would be prioritized to use NODA. So basically, how do we take those kids that might be a little bit more clear-cut, a little bit more urgency, and I mean, everybody should be urgent for sure, but a bit more our ability to streamline their assessment to get them qualified for services, and then to have their assessment be the next stage of really knowing their developmental levels and what are their treatment goals going to be. So that's how we've approached it on an ongoing basis, and we're in the process of coming up with a protocol to use with some of our early intervention districts around the state, where if they have a child that is already in early intervention but is screening high for autism, can we really use NODA along with doing a video-based family interview and collecting other developmental information to streamline their assessment.
I think that may touch on this question a little bit. Is NODA purely for naturalistic observations without directing the parents, or have you considered using it for more structured assessments?
Yeah, and this one may be a bigger, I'll have to say that outside of NODA, and I don't know if this is good or not to say on the NODA focused assessment, but we've been using another protocol at times. Vanderbilt has a free guidance called the Telepedes, where you do give the family some instructions, but we're actually working with the behavior imaging and the NODA team to what we call NODA Enhanced, which is to add some of those features where we give more structure, or we're able to do live tagging as part of the interview. We're also trying to, part of that is working with the platform known as Chattis, which has brought together a lot of the common screening and assessment tools. So like the social communication questionnaire, the MChat are all embedded in Chattis. And how do we more seamlessly integrate those tools with the powerful video observation tool of NODA? So I would say stay tuned on that. I think we're going to have even more powerful tools in the future. But so that's kind of where we are with things.
I should also say that the instructions to the parents for making the videos have some times where they say, like, throughout the thing, every so often, call your child's name or point to something and see if they'll look. So it does have some structure to it, but it is mostly the naturalistic, what's going on in the home. And then at least 1 or 2 times within the 10 minutes, I believe it is, it's like, do this other thing so that we can see those specific behaviors.
Thank you, Dr. Morrier. This next question might need Ron Oberleitner, the CEO of Behavior Imaging, to hop on, but maybe you all will be able to answer it. How long are the videos stored for, and is there a process in place for transferring to clinical record or for GDPR?
Yeah, hi folks, this is Ron Oberleitner. The videos are
having a hard time hearing you. There you go.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, start over, please.
Yeah, so basically from a HIPAA point of view, the videos will be stored up to 7 years to conform to HIPAA. As far as terms and agreement with clinics that we're doing the service for, that video data is available to access for 6 months typically before going inactive. So important for everybody to know that HIPAA works like electronic health records as far as the storage and the access conforms to HIPAA guidelines for clinics who use us.
Great. Well, we've gotten through all the questions that we got during the presentation. You can see that our illustrious doctors have their email addresses up here for you if you have any further questions. I'm going to put my email address again in the chat. I am kelly@behaviorimaging.com. I am happy to go between you and the behavior imaging team with any questions you might have, or help facilitate any of the materials we talked about today. So please be in touch. I will be emailing you the recorded video of the webinar along with the Q&A for your reference going forward. And I hope this was a helpful webinar for everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rice, Dr. Schwartz, Dr. Morrier. Couldn't have done it without you.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Stay safe and healthy.
Yes, please.
But connected.
Thank you.
Bye.